And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are commander staples that I think are probably in way too many decks. You know, I don't like to make videos where I tell people don't play these cards. I'm more on the other end of the spectrum where I'm telling people, hey, here's a bunch of interesting cards that could probably see more play. You know, there's always situations where a card that is seemingly awful is going to be good. There's always, that's what this format is great for. In particular, if you watch my 10 cards videos, there's a whole lot of cards on there that are on their face seem awful, but in a certain deck or with a certain commander, they're fantastic. It's a great partnership, right? It's a great fit. However, I think there's a lot of cards that get horribly overplayed in the format. I'm not saying they're bad. They're definitely good. These are all commander staples, but are getting played way too much just because they're commander staples, right? So I started putting a deck together for a deck I was making recently, and I had planned on having a large hand size or maybe an over large hand size in that deck. And so I thought, okay, well, Reliquary Tower and Thought Vessel, I'll put those in there. And I was shocked to find out that Reliquary Tower, despite the fact being reprinted like 20 times, is still like a $3 card. And Thought Vessel, despite being reprinted like 20 times, is like a $4 card. That's crazy, you know? And I thought, you know, not that that's a ton of money, but how does a card that has been preprinted that many times still cost that much money? And so I looked it up, and sure enough, Thought Vessel is in 100,000 decks on EDH Rec. It's in 12% of all decks, which that's a lot. Like, how many people out there are expecting to have a larger than 7 cards hand size, right? Because that's the only reason you would want to put this in your deck. I think, especially at this point, if you're just looking for a 2-mana mana rock, there's a lot of better Liquid Metal Torque, Ornithopter Paradise, right? You know, so maybe that's the case where people are just using this for it's a 2-mana mana rock. Reliquary Tower, though, 229,000 decks on EDH Rec. It is in 28% of all commander decks on there. That's crazy. Why? It's a colorless land, and I would much rather have, you could check out my 30 colorless utility lands video. Wasteland, Strip Mine, Ghost Quarter, Scavenger Grounds, Blast Zone. I had Reliquary Tower on that list. I can't remember where. It was down there, though, because I just don't think there's that much need for that, right? So those 2 cards, I think, are probably putting a lot of... Like, how often are you getting more than 7 cards in your hand, right? If you're in a theme where you're drawing a ton of cards, obviously they're very usable, but I think a lot of people, especially with Reliquary Tower, are just auto-including that in all their decks. Or maybe it's maybe this is a pre-con scenario where I think they throw Reliquary Tower in a lot of pre-cons, and maybe people just aren't taking them out. So maybe it's time to take that Reliquary Tower out and put in, something a little more usable. I mean, chances are, I can almost guarantee there is going to be a utility land out there that is more usable in your deck than Reliquary Tower, and probably also a lot cheaper. But I thought then, you know what, why don't I just keep going with this, and I'll actually check out the list of the most popular cards in the format. And of course, I'm using EDH Rec for this. It's the most accurate way to gauge this. And of course, you can always tell if these things are accurate or not because you're always playing in games. So if you see a card on this list that isn't, you're like, hey, I never see that card, then, maybe that's a situation where that's not the case. Of course, always these kinds of things are playgroup specific, right? In certain playgroups, there's a certain card that your playgroup loves, and there's other cards your playgroups never play for various reasons, and so you never see it. So you think it's odd that it's one of the most popular cards in the format. But I was just going through the list of the most popular cards in the format and thinking, I think this is overplayed. Definitely not bad. Please don't comment below on why you think these cards are good. They're all good, no question. I just think they're overplayed. I think they're in way too many decks. So Cultivate is the 4th most popular card in the entire format, according to EDH Rec. That seems like a bit much. It's definitely a good card. I have it currently in maybe 1 deck. And I realize cost is an issue here, and I get that. Okay, I'm not taking cost into consideration here with these. I understand that it can be an issue. That being said, if you're not extremely restricted on cost, and we're just talking about which cards are better here, for me, I tend to gravitate towards the 2-mana options, right? So Nature's Lore, 3 visits, Sakura Tribe Elder is just an auto include for me. Rampant Growth, Farseek, right? There's 5 options, all 2 mana. Because for me, and again, this plays into the mana rock thing as well, I would much rather have a 2 mana option where in my opening hand, I only have 2 lands. But in a green deck, you should be okay with 2 lands in your opening hand, I think. And if I'm looking at my opening hand and I see a Sakura Tribe Elder on top of those 2 lands, I'm like, okay, I'm good. If I have a Cultivate and 2 lands, now I'm thinking, okay, I got to make sure I draw into a land here or I could be in trouble. Again, I understand that cost can be an issue here for people, but really surprised, like that many decks. It is in 50% of all decks that it can go into. That's a lot. And that's on top of Kodama's Reach, which is just slightly farther down the list. It's in 36%. So that means a whole lot of people are playing both Cultivate and Kodama's Reach in their green decks. I mean, is this a case of maybe you have too much ramp? I think that definitely is the case a lot of times. I think a lot of people probably go overboard with the ramp in their decks. I think the signets are a little bit too popular. They are the, outside of Sol Ring and Arcane Signet, they're the most popular mana rocks in the format, and again, I know people will say cost is an issue, but is it signets like $1? Dimir Signet is, for whatever reason, like $4. I'm not sure what the reason is there. So cost is a little bit of an issue, but kind of not. I understand the talismans are more expensive generally. They're just straight up better in my opinion because you can play them and use them right away, whereas the signets, you have to put that mana into it. So the fact that the signets come out on turn 2 untapped usually is meaningless because you can't use them right away anyway because you have to put a mana into them. I know they're good at mana fixing. For me, I like putting the signets in a 2-color deck. So an Orzhov signet for me goes in an Orzhov deck. That's it. I just like the fact that it's giving me the exact 2 mana that I need. I wouldn't put them in any other decks other than that. These are definitely good. I'm not saying they're bad. I've put them in decks. Like I just said, I put them in my 2-color decks. I think they're a little overplayed. They're mostly in 35% of all decks that they could be in. That means 35% of decks that have blue and black are going to have a Dimir Signet in it, right? That's not just the Dimir decks. That's also the Grixis decks. That's also the Sultai decks. That seems a little high to me. Brainstorm is in 30% of all the decks that it can be in. I can't believe how much decks this is in. I can't believe it. It's in over 122,000 decks. That's incredible. There's no way it should be in that many decks. And I've gone on several rants on this before on my Patreon because I'll do deck doctors for my patrons and they'll have Brainstorm, Ponder, Preordain in there. And I'm like, why do you have these in there? I think they're good in specific situations. Overall, they're incredibly low impact. I don't care that they cost 1 mana. You're not doing much. You're drawing 1 card. That's all you're doing, right? All those cards, all they do is replace themselves. They're cantrips, right? You look at the top cards of your library a little bit, right? Brainstorm's good if you actually want to stack the top of your library. And there are a few decks that do that. There certainly is not 122,000 decks that do that. As a draw spell, it's not good. I know it looks good, draw 3 cards, but you're putting 2 cards back. So Brainstorm just replaces itself, right? If you have 7 cards in your hand and you cast a Brainstorm, I'm going to draw 3 cards and put 2 cards back, and my Brainstorm goes to the graveyard. So now I have the same amount of cards in my hand as I did before, right? So it's really good at, the reason it gets played in Legacy a lot, I'll just say, and maybe that's why it is so popular in Commander as well, is because it's really good at shuffling away stuff you don't want. So in Legacy, you have a fetch land in play, you Brainstorm, put a couple cards on your hand that you don't want, and then you crack your fetch and shuffle them away. How often is that going to be happening in a Commander game? I mean, it might, maybe not. I think a lot of situations that's not happening. I think a lot of situations people are just casting a Brainstorm, just cantripping, and then just putting 2 cards on top of their library that they're then going to draw again in the next 2 turns. So you really haven't accomplished a whole lot, right? I'm going to make a video entirely about this. Ponder, Preordain, Opt, all those cards get played way too much in the format, in my opinion. They're great for cantripping. They're great for, I'm playing a Niv Mizzet deck or something where I want to get those triggers. It's good for that, sure. It's great for draw triggers, if that's the deck you're playing it in. But again, 122,000 decks, that's not just draw decks, and that's just not, Amanatu decks where I want to put stuff on top of my library, I think. Putrefy and Mortify, both of these, I think, are in way more decks than they should be. I'm not going to harp on this a lot. I love removal, so I don't have a problem with it. I don't know if I've ever put Mortify in a deck. I think because black and white has just such fantastic removal. I'm not sure. It's just so easy to replace Mortify in your deck now, especially after the year of removal. In my opinion, we had a great year for removal. Again, I realize that that cost is an issue, but yeah, take Mortify out. There's so many better options now, and Putrefy again. I think Orzhov colors are the best colors, but best color combination for removal. Golgari's probably number two. Really don't think that Putrefy and Mortify should be really in hardly any decks anymore, in my opinion. Growth Spiral, 44,000 decks. That's a lot. That's a really, again, this to me feels a lot like the Brainstorm scenario where very low impact, 2 mana, instant, draw a card. You may put a land from your hand on the battlefield. You know, I mean, it's very low impact. If I'm in a landfall deck, maybe I'm in a Simic deck where I want to be drawing and putting lands in play. I think it's a good fit there. Other than that, just very low impact. Like, what if I don't have a land in my hand? Now I just paid 2 mana to draw a card. That's awful, right? So, you know, is 44,000 decks the 44,000 Tatiova and Zamone decks, you know, icy decks? I don't think that's getting to 44,000. So I think this card's probably in more decks than it should be. You know, as a ramp spell, it's terrible. There's way better options, obviously, because you're in green. As a draw spell, it's awful because you're in blue and there's a lot of better options. I just don't think this should be in nearly as many decks as it is. I'm going to talk about two spells together here, Supreme Verdict and Krosan Grip. And what do these two cards have to do in common? Well, I think they're both getting overplayed for the same reason. And I just talked about Krosan Grip in my sort of fan questions video that I did. And I want to reiterate that I think these are all good cards. I'm not saying they're unplayable or bad. They're all great. They're all Commander staples. There certainly is a lot of reasons to play them. However, I mean, Supreme Verdict to me is getting to the point. Again, if you're in that play group where there's lots of counter spells flying around, okay. I've never had an attraction to Supreme Verdict ever, because what is the deck that is playing lots of creatures and lots of counter spells? What's that deck, right? Because that's what Supreme Verdict is for. Supreme Verdict is, I want to board wipe because my opponent's got a lot of creatures. They also have a lot of counterspells in their deck. What deck is that? Talron, maybe? Like, there's very few decks that Supreme Verdict is specifically good against, I think. And there's just so many fantastic board wipes. Again, Vanquish the Horde and By Invitation Only are two of the best board wipes in the format now, both better than Supreme Verdict, in my opinion. If you're in a situation where, yeah, your opponents like to throw around lots of counter spells, okay, I get it. Krosan Grip, same thing. There's just so many better options for destroying artifacts and enchantments. So many. Krosan Grip is in 62,000 decks. If you're in the situation, again, specific situations, my playgroup likes to throw around counter spells. I have, you know, Aetherflux Reservoir, Sensei's Divining Top. There's certain artifacts that it works really good against. That's it. That's the, you know, for me, I have it in 0 decks. I have both of these cards in 0 decks. I maybe have played Krosan Grip in a deck once, but that was a long time ago. And now because there's so many better options, I don't play it anymore. Supreme Verdict, I've never put in a deck. Again, I always sort of was a little curious about what's the situation where I need a Supreme Verdict, where I'm worried about getting countered. You know, my opponent has to play a creature heavy deck that also has lots of counter spells, and that's usually not a thing. It happens, but it's rare. So I think both of these cards probably get played more than they should. Wrath of God, well, we're talking about board wipes. And this one can't really be a case of price. It's not that cheap. I mean, it's like a $5 card. So I don't think people are throwing this in their decks because it's cheap. And I don't think people are throwing this in their decks because their opponents have a lot of regenerating creatures. I don't think that's the reason people are playing it. I hope this is just a case of, you know, it's layover or holdover from old deck lists or something like that. There has been so many fantastic board wipes this year. There's no reason to play Wrath of God anymore, I don't think, unless you're really going deep on the board wipes. I think for sure, again, By Invitation Only and Vanquish the Horde are way better than this. I also really like Devastating Mastery, which destroys all permanents. I would play that over this. You know, again, you can cast it for the 4 mana if that's really important for you. And Doomscar, I think, is better than this. You can cast that for even cheaper. I also prefer Cleansing Nova over Wrath of God because it can also destroy artifacts and enchantments. Austere Command, as I've said many times, is my favorite board wipe. All of those are I'm going to play over Wrath of God. I've never put Wrath of God in a deck. It's in 41,000 decks on EDH Rec. I'm not sure why. Again, it's not even that cheap. So I don't know why so many people are playing it. Narset's Reversal. And here's a card that I did not think that I was going to be talking about. I've only seen it in a game a few times, not that much. It is in 45,000 decks. 45,000. Why? It's a neat card. I've seen it. Just played a game, I think, the other day with one of my patrons where they did something kind of neat with it. It can be good for, I'm in a mono blue deck, and, again, you have that color restriction where I can't destroy enchantments, for example. So my opponent casts enchantment removal. I bounce it to their hand so that I can then use it to destroy an enchantment. I guess it's good there. Man, 45,000 though. As a counter spell, if that's why people are running it, it's not good, obviously, because, that's like playing Remand in Commander. I've seen a few people do that. I think that's terrible as well. Your opponent casts that big spell. They're just going to cast it again the next turn. Holding them off for one turn doesn't seem that great. For me, I see this card as my opponent casts something that I can't do. I don't have a Swords to Plowshares in my deck, so they cast it, and I bounce it back to their hand so I can copy it and hit something on the table that I want to get rid of, and then they're just going to cast it again. I mean, if you're using this to protect your own stuff, there's way better options. I mean, maybe you can comment below why you specifically like this card. I don't think it's great. It's good in very specific situations, I think. Here's another one that absolutely shocked me. Thrill of Possibility. This card is in 43,000 decks. Whew. And again, are people just using this as a draw spell? Like, that's what I'm thinking. Is this the red version of Night's Whisper or something? I think this is pretty good in a discard theme where you want stuff in your graveyard. Is there 43,000 decks in red that are doing that? I don't know. But again, if you're just using this as a draw spell, let's run through it here, okay? You have 5 cards in your hand. One of them is Thrill of Possibility. You cast your Thrill of Possibility, goes on the stack. Now you're down to 4 cards in hand. You discard a card as an additional cost to cast it. Now you're down to 3 cards in hand. Then you draw 2 cards. So you're at 5 cards in hand, right? You've gained nothing, right? This is a card that gains you nothing. You only replace the cards that you just got rid of. Now that's not terrible. Maybe you have a land in your hand and you can discard it. It's just very low impact. Again, I think I've never put this in a deck ever. I would put it in a deck where I want to be discarding. I want maybe to chuck a big creature in my graveyard so I can reanimate it or something. As a draw spell, I don't think it's very good at all. I can't believe it's in 43,000 decks. Gitaxian Probe. Again, this is in 40,000 decks. What? This is another case of, and I think this is a bit of a phenomenon that happens in the format where a card gets banned in another format. And so people are like, wow, that card must be busted because it's banned in Modern. So I'm going to start stuffing it in my decks. I think that's what the case with Growth Spiral. I think that's the case with Preordain and Ponder a little bit. This card is very specific in certain situations, right? So in Modern, this got played in a couple of decks in Modern. The first deck it got played in was the Storm decks, obviously because you can cast it for free, right? That's what makes Gitaxian Probe so good. The other thing that makes it good is in a 2-player format, you can look at your opponent's hand and see if they have any counter spells, removal, right? So if you were in that Infect deck where you wanted to load up your creature and get in for lethal damage, you would cast the Gitaxian Probe to see if your opponent had any way to stop you before you load it up. You didn't want to waste it. If they had a removal spell in their hand, you weren't going to do that, right? So it was a way to protect you from wasting all your resources on that one-hit kill. That's not the case in Commander, right? In Commander, you have 3 opponents. So looking at one player's hand is, again, it's very, who are you going to pick? You're just going to pick the guy that you think is the most threatening, maybe? Or the guy who you think has removal? Or the guy who you think might have a counter spell? That should be almost everyone at the table. So I don't know how. And again, it's a cantrip. You replace it. So it's 0 mana. I draw a card. Okay. And then what? Again, just like with the Brainstorm, Ponder, all that, you're cantripping. So it's good in a, I want to get draw triggers scenario because I can pay 0 mana. Is the 0 mana what really grabs people? Like, wow, I can cast a card for 0 mana. I don't think there's 40,000 Storm decks in Commander. I really don't think so. I also don't think there's 40,000, how many Niv Mizzet decks are there? Maybe 4,000. So again, I'm not saying this is not a usable card. I'm not saying it's terrible. I think it's probably in way more decks than it should be. It's just so low impact, right? Unless you want it for a very specific, this is a very specific card that is doing a very specific thing. So if you're not in any of those very specific scenarios, you probably shouldn't be playing it. There's better options. Remember, people, we have over 20,000 cards to choose from, some of the most powerful cards in the history of the game. and you're putting a Cataxian Probe in your deck rather than something that maybe is way better, way more impactful, right? Just keep that in mind. Village Rites, 33,000 decks. Wow, really? It is an instant, which is nice. I kind of like the, my commander's going to die anyway, so why not pay 1 mana, sacrifice it, and I get to draw 2 cards. But I think there's better options, right? I want my spells in my deck to be impactful. This is so low impact. If you're in a deck where you really want to be sacrificing stuff like an Aristocrats deck, great. Are there 33,000 decks that are doing that? Maybe there are. There are a lot of Aristocrats deck. Even if I'm in that theme, I want something that's more impactful. Vampiric Rites, as an example, is a personal favorite of mine. Costs 2 mana, but guess what? I get to use it over and over and over again. This is taking up a spot in your deck. I definitely err on the side of permanence, because when something's sitting on the table, it's not just a one-shot. If I have a one-shot spell, I want to get some oomph behind it. I really want to get some value for my spell. If it's just going to be cast, go to the graveyard, and I never see it again. I would much rather have, for something low impact, like I draw a card, Phyrexian Arena. Now I'm going to draw a card every single turn rather than just I cast a Ponder and I cantrip, right? That's so low impact, and then that card has taken up a space in my library and it's now gone, presumably forever, right? Village Rites, again, same exact thing. I'm going to play my Vampiric Rites over this because now I have a sack outlet that I have on the table all the time, and I can reuse it over and over and over again, and I haven't taken up a spot in my deck for something that is very low impact. Again, draw 2 cards is I've sacrificed a creature and I've cast this spell, so that's 2 cards gone and replaced by 2 cards, right? So you're just replacing itself. You're replacing 2 cards for 2 cards, right? So you're not really up anything. If you really want to be sacrificing stuff, though, it is good. Again, I'm not saying it shouldn't be played. In certain themes, it should be played. I think it's probably played too much, though. Explosive Vegetation. That's right. This card is still in 31,000 decks. I'm not sure why. I'm not going to harp on this. I think this has been covered quite a bit by a lot of different channels. I've seen at least 3 other channels talking about why are people still playing this card. I mean, if you're really strapped, I guess Cultivate, Explosive Vegetation, Kodama's Reach are the cheapest options. I mean, people can do as they like. If you just want to really go extreme budget, that's fine. But what you should do is you should throw your deck together with Kodama's Reach, Cultivate, Explosive Vegetation, and then, maybe next month I swap out that Explosive Vegetation for a Sky Shroud Claim, which is straight up better, or a Migrations Path, which is straight up better. And, and then I swap out the Cultivate for maybe a Farseek. We're not talking about a huge difference in price here, right? It doesn't take much to swap out those, what I consider worse ramp cards for ones that are slightly better and slightly more expensive, right? So the fact that Explosive Vegetation is still in 31,000 decks just tells me that people just don't really care to swap it out with something better, I guess. Again, I don't like to disparage people in the way they want to play their decks. People can do whatever they like, and I don't want to disparage certain cards. If I was going really deep on ramp, I would put Explosive Vegetation in my deck. It does get 2 lands, and there's not a ton of cards that do that. Putting 2 lands directly into play. Tatiova, maybe. If I'm playing a Tatiova deck, I probably would put Explosive Vegetation in there, I think. Yeah, not a lot. Like 31,000 decks, that's a lot. I think this card is definitely way overplayed in the format. And I'm going to end off on 2 cards, Lotus Petal and Dark Ritual. And both of these cards fall into the trap of, it's sort of like the Brainstorm thing a little bit, where it's a cheap spell that seems to give you a big effect. Man, people are so mesmerized by anything that costs 0. Anytime you don't have to pay mana for a spell, people just seem so enthralled by that. Dark Ritual, again, it's in the history of Magic, it's one of the most powerful spells. In other formats, though, I think in Commander, 3 mana is, and again, you're using 1 mana, so you're only up 2. You're gaining 2 mana. It's a one-shot, I add 2 mana. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, 68,000 decks Dark Ritual is in, 51,000 decks for Lotus Petal. Again, shocked when I saw that. I don't know why. Like, Lotus Petal for me is, where am I going to play that? I'm going to play it in a deck where I'm in an artifact theme, right? I'm in a Silas deck. I think it's a great fit because it is that mana boost, but it's also that artifact that's free that I can just chuck in my graveyard, and when I connect with my Silas, I can then cast it for free. I don't have to worry about leaving mana open. I just cast it and then reuse it again. So it's just free value because you keep getting it out of your graveyard over and over. Maybe I put it in an Akiri deck or some artifact themed deck. Is there 51,000 decks that are doing that? I don't think so. I think that Lotus Petal is in a whole lot of decks, again, for two reasons. One, because people want that extra little mana boost, and maybe in like a CEDH game, that one extra mana can make all the difference. In a casual game, I don't think it typically will. Also, I think that Lotus Petal and Dark Ritual suffer from, again, the same sort of scenario where this is so busted in other formats, it must be good in Commander. I don't think that's the case. I think Commander is just such a different format from all the other, the 60 card formats for sure, that cards like this are just so low impact. Lotus Petal, you're taking up a spot in your library for 1 mana. And for what? So I can get my Commander out 1 turn earlier? Again, like with the Cataxian Probe, if I'm storming off or something, okay, if there is a specific situation where this is good, I'm in that artifact theme, I want artifacts in my graveyard because I'm playing an Armix deck. Whatever the case may be, but in most decks, I think Lotus Petal is you're just taking up a spot in your deck that could be used for something way better, like a removal spell, or like how many times, with Dark Ritual and Lotus Petal, just ask yourself, how many times have these cards won me the game or saved me the game? And I know people will say, oh, well, that's a really high bar to put any card in your deck. Maybe, but you look at any removal spell, you can say, okay, that card saved me the game or could save me the game, save me from losing or save me from, letting my opponents win. Any removal spell. So that means any removal spell you can put in your deck other than a Lotus Petal or a Dark Ritual, and it could possibly save you the game. And there's a whole lot of cards that could help you win the game that aren't a Lotus Petal or a Dark Ritual. And those cards also, these cards suffer from the I played my first turn Soul Ring scenario as well, right? Which is that big explosive, and people really like that big explosive first turn. I don't know why. People seem really attracted to that, where I get to do a whole bunch of stuff on my first turn. Aha, look at me. All it does is empty your hand really fast, make you a target. The game's now arch enemy right out of the gate. So that's not good. That's not good for anybody. So I just don't like that at all. I think I'd said in my Commander retrospective video about how, if I have a Soul Ring, for the decks that I still have that card in, if I have a Soul Ring in my opening hand, I don't play it. I don't see any reason to. All I'm going to do is make myself a target, possibly for the rest of the game, right? So I'm going to hold it in my hand and play it turn 2, right? I can't think of a specific reason why I need to play it turn 1. I don't need a really explosive start. None of my decks are built that way. So for me, I'm going to hold on to it, play it turn 2, and trust me, it makes all the difference in the world. Playing a turn 1 Soul Ring makes you a target. Playing a turn 2, people are like, it's not that, it still makes you a little bit of a target, but not nearly as much. You'd be surprised how much of a difference it makes. I'm wondering the scenario here with Lotus Petal and Dark Ritual. For me, it always comes down to, with all of these low impact cards, right? The Brainstorms, the Lotus Petals, the Dark Rituals, it's a one-shot card that is giving you really a tiny advantage. Lotus Petal gives you 1 mana. Is that really good, giving you 1 mana? Dark Ritual only gives you 2, right? You're using 1 mana and you're gaining 3, so you're only up 2 mana. Is that like super busted? Is that like, does that deserve to go in 63,000 decks? I don't think it is. If there's a reason you need to get your Commander out super fast, again, then now you're just opening yourself up for removal. So now I've used a slot in my deck for Dark Ritual so that I can get my Commander out super fast, and then my opponent just casts Swords to Plowshares. Again, I can make all of these arguments about Jeweled Lotus as well, by the way, where it's, making you a target. It's you're using up a slot in your deck just to get a thing out faster. I think that a lot of these cards in particular, but a lot of these other cards, go to the mentality of, people see cards in other formats that are really, really good. And, well, it's got to be good in Commander too, right? These cards are just really, really good, so they must be good in Commander as well. And I think a lot of the time, that's not the case. I mean, man, how are you, if you're looking at your deck list and you got a Lotus Petal in there, and there's this great, fantastic card that came out in a new set that you want to put in your deck, how are you not taking out Lotus Petal to put that card in? Right? You're saying, oh, no, Lotus Petal's so good in my deck that I'm going to leave it in there rather than putting in this phenomenal card that just came out in a new set. Or maybe you're just going to take something else out. But man, I just think any deck I have, Lotus Petal would come out of my deck so fast to put in something more impactful. How impactful is Lotus Petal in your deck? How impactful is Dark Ritual in your deck? How impactful is that Brainstorm in your deck? If it is, great. But if it's not, then maybe you should be replacing it with something more impactful. Basically what I'm getting at with a lot of the cards on this list, all right, and again, I want to reiterate, I'm not saying these cards are bad. I'm not saying they're unplayable. They're all very playable. Most of them, okay, some of them are Commander staples that I think maybe are a little overplayed. Some of them are, like Gitaxian Probe and Lotus Petal, good in very specific situations and just get played way more than they probably should be. That's just my personal opinion, my humble opinion. I know I'm going to get a lot of disagreement on this in the comments below because a lot of these people are like, that's my favorite card. I throw it in all my decks. Why are you throwing it in all your decks? Okay, stop and ask yourself why, okay? Critical thinking here, people. Ask yourself, why are you throwing Lotus Petal in all your decks? Why are you throwing Dark Ritual in all your decks? Is there a specific reason? Is it actually helping you? Is there a better card that I can put in there instead of that? I think a lot of the times there probably is. But that is all. That's just, a bunch of cards that I thought were, man, again, I started out with the Reliquary Tower and the Thought Vessel, and I'm like, man, those cards are in way too many decks, especially Reliquary Tower. Way too many. Just try to think to yourself, how often am I in a game where I have to discard down to hand size, right? I'm sure that doesn't happen very often. So probably you could take that out for some way more impactful, way more useful colorless utility land, right? Even a Field of the Dead. I think that's probably a card that's overplayed as well. Probably better than Reliquary Tower, though. You're doing a lot more there. Comment below what you think. If you disagree with me, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of that in the comments. That's fine. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion. I'm just giving you mine. Trying to get the wheels turning, like I do with a lot of my videos, is I get the wheel turning and people are like, maybe he's got a point about that Brainstorm. Maybe I should take it out and put in something a little more impactful. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.